autofocus is ruining my videos, and sometimes it's really annoying me to the point where I decided to make this video. The challenge is that cameras are dumb. They don't know what I wanted to focus on unless I specifically tell it what to focus on. And in our society nowadays, new cameras come out all the time, and every time they do, they say, oh, this is the fastest, best, most reliable autofocus ever, and it has an AI chip and it can read your mind. Maybe they don't take it that far, but that's kind of what I keep getting fed into my brain, and why I sometimes forget that the camera is dumb and it doesn't know what I'm thinking and what I actually want. And at the same time, where I tend to rely most on the autofocus is when I need to be fast and efficient. And that tends to be the cases where it also fails the most, for me at least. So to explain this and come up with some solutions on how you can make your autofocus work the best possible for you, and why I don't like it as much anymore, let me first tell you a story. A few days ago, I went to Hobbiton here in New Zealand, which is the original set that they used to film Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit trilogy. We went there and we were going on a tour. That's the only way you can visit the set. And I wanted to go full tourist mode, so I wasn't actually planning to bring my camera until last minute when I decided to do so anyway. And hindsight, I'm glad I did, but I also ended up capturing way more footage than I originally intended to, because I just wanted to be a tourist. I just wanted to experience it. But as soon as I bring my camera, I can't help myself. So what I did was bring my 24-70 and just kind of capture whatever I saw, which is fine. That's kind of like tourist mode shooting as well. And one thing it made me realize in hindsight was that I've gotten so fast and efficient and getting my exposure right and getting my composition that I don't need to think about it too much. So I could actually still be in the moment and participate in the tour and get the full experience. I feel like at least 85% of the experience, because sometimes I was still just shooting. I also realized when I came back that half the shots that I got out of, 60 shots that I actually liked, were kind of out of focus. It was not fully out of focus, I can still be used, but in some instances it focused on a plant right in front of the Hobbit house, where I'm like, stupid camera. It's obvious that it's the Hobbit's house that I want in focus and not the bush right in front of it. But it didn't know better, because I didn't set it up properly to shoot. I was just kind of doing my thing and not really thinking about it, which I normally do when I'm not in tourist mode. But I guess a lot of beginners are in this instance where they haven't used the camera for as long, so this video is for you. So I have two scenarios where autofocus sometimes ruins my footage, and also a solution to how you can at least try and make autofocus help you as much as possible, or stick to what you're actually wanting it to stick to. The first problem is that the camera can't read my mind, as we talked about earlier as well. So in instances where there's a lot of things in the scene, there's a lot of things going on, there's a lot of depth, different scenarios that cause the autofocus to not know exactly what I wanted to focus on. And there's a few different things that you can do to try and not be me and actually nail the focus that you want. And the first one is to shoot in a selective or spot focus mode. So that usually means that you have a little box on your screen that you can move around and tell the autofocus, in this little area, I want you to focus. And that's very helpful to tell it exactly. If I had moved that little box to the Hobbit home, that bush would have never been in focus. I'm pretty sure of that, because autofocus is that good these days. But sometimes it takes a while to move that little box around, which is why I initially didn't do that in this case, because I didn't want to move it around all the time. The ZV-1 that I shoot on don't have a lot of buttons or joysticks and stuff, so it is a little bit more annoying to move that around. So that is essentially why I opted to not do it, and why I regret not doing it. The second thing you can do is, if you have a camera that has a touchscreen and you can touch to focus, you can simply just press the LCD screen where you want it to focus. Now my hand is usually not hovering over the LCD screen, which is why I also didn't do that in most instances. In some I did. And the second thing with that, or the problem with that sometimes, is that the camera can kind of lose that point or move that point to something else. If you move the camera around a lot, or if something interferes, like some person walks in front of the frame, sometimes they can catch that little spot that you've selected and then bring it with them, and then maybe it snaps to something else afterwards. So that's kind of both two solutions, but also two problems at the same time, where it can be difficult or take too much time to shoot. So the last thing that I've been doing for the most part is actually to use one of those two methods and then switch it to manual focus after. You can either do that on the lens, depending on what lens you have, or you can set up a button to be switching between manual and autofocus. And that'll basically mean that if you tell the camera, focus on this point, and then you switch it to manual focus, then it'll be locked there. Of course, if you're trying to track a person moving further away from or closer to the camera, that won't work, because then that point that you selected or switched to manual focus will be in focus and it will not track them. So it mostly works if someone is moving on like a straight line like this in the camera, or if you just are moving the camera and the subject is staying in the same position. Then you can kind of come around that issue. The second thing that I usually encounter, which was not referred to Hobbiton in this case because I was behind the camera the whole time, but it's in situations like this where I'm talking to the camera, I've set it up, I've framed everything that I want. Now I'm just hoping and praying that the camera keeps me in focus the whole time that I'm talking, which is not always the case. And this is probably, it's not the time where it annoys me the most, but it's one of the times where it annoys me the most, because I can't see it happening. When I'm behind the camera, I can kind of see it happening. I can be like, oh, that's annoying. And then I can do it again if possible, or the shot is just ruined because the camera is hunting for focus. But the worst scenario is probably this, when it's just starting to focus on the background for some magical reason that it thinks that that's the case. So on most cameras, you can select what kind of subject you're trying to focus on. You have like humans, and you can do eye detection, which is what I have on now. Some cameras can do bird and vehicles and all kind of crazy stuff. But you also have two other settings that I think are more overlooked, at least they were for me for a very long time. And those are the responsiveness and the kind of locked on-ness. That's not a word, but that's what I'm gonna say. So one is how fast it transitions the autofocus, saying that if something came walking behind me now and the camera decided to do that, if it's set to slow, it would be a very gradual transition of focus to that person, which means that in case someone walked in front of me, instead of it just snapping onto them very quickly and snapping back to me, where you can really see it, if it's set to slow, maybe it wouldn't fully catch on to that person and just like start to focus on them and then catch back onto me and then focus back on. So that would be one thing that you could change. And the other thing is kind of the responsiveness. How fast should it change between subjects? And in my instance, when I'm shooting like this, I set it to slow transition, not all the way down, because I also need to move from the camera when I started and over here. And then I set it to locked on. So that means like when I've chosen my subject, which is me, then do not change the subject. Hold on to me for dear life, please. That's the two things you can do to kind of try and get those to work better. It also works great if you're trying to track subject. You kind of want them to be in focus. So the best thing there is to like click on them on the screen if you can, and have it set to not necessarily slow transition, because if they're going to move to the camera, you want it to be able to catch up to that, but at least to locked on, so that it's staying on that person and holding on for dear life, and hopefully it's going to stay there. So those are kind of the two tips that I have for you to make or improve your autofocus as much as possible. And lastly, I just want to say I prefer shooting manual focus these days, and it's all because of this lens. I've talked about it in a previous video as well. This is the IRIX 65mm T1.5 cine lens, and this lens does not have autofocus at all. And the first thing getting this lens that I was scared of was that particular fact, because like maybe you, I'd only ever used autofocus lenses my entire life, which is like the past 6+ years of having cameras, first photography, then filmmaking. And I relied so much on autofocus that I didn't realize what I was kind of missing out on, or what I was sometimes missing, because through all that time, I have struggled with autofocus in these scenarios that I've just explained to you. Since I started shooting with manual focus, I've been a lot more intentional with how I'm actually shooting. I feel like I'm more in charge of what I want in focus and how I frame things. And of course you can do that with autofocus as well, but there's another intentionality with it when I do it with manual focus. And the second thing is that I feel like when I mess up the focus with manual focus, which I do all the time, so I'm not a professional, I've only had this lens for 1.5 months, and I love the look of it and I love shooting with manual focus, but it comes with its challenges as well. And that is sometimes I miss focus because I'm still practicing that, especially when using that small LCD screen. It can be a struggle. But I at least feel like it's my fault when I miss focus, whereas when the autofocus suddenly starts hunting all over the place, there's nothing I can do about it. There's nothing I could do to change it other than the settings that we just talked about. And it frustrates me so much because I feel like the shot is ruined and it's not my fault. At least when I'm using mechanical manual focus, I feel like it's my fault. And using manual focus on photo lenses, it's not really great. So I don't necessarily recommend you going that path. then I would probably rather just use the autofocus in the different ways that we talked about. But I really enjoy shooting with manual focus, and it took me switching to this to realize the frustrations that I actually had with shooting autofocus, which is why it's led me to make this video, which hopefully helped you out in some way or capacity, or you found it interesting. I hope you learned something from the settings or the things that you can do at least, and yeah, otherwise just enjoyed it. So if you're new to filmmaking and you want to learn more, I've just made an ebook called Filmmaking Foundations that has all that I know, and I'm updating it every month. So if you're interested in that, you want to learn more, it's linked in the description if you want to check it out. If not, it's there. I plan to make a lot more videos talking about different subjects like this, just in filmmaking in general. So if you're interested in hearing more of that, subscribe to the channel. And yeah, I hope I see you in another video. And until then, take care. Cheers.